Avenida Paulista throbbed with the characteristic energy of São Paulo, a cauldron of sounds and images swirling in a frenetic rhythm. Traffic flowed in a sea of lights and metal, strident horns competing with the babble of pedestrians. Amidst this urban chaos, an elegant black SUV, a luxury model that attracted admiring glances wherever it passed, glided smoothly, as if in a world apart. Inside the vehicle, Paulo Medeiros, a man in his 50s with an aura of power and sophistication, enjoyed a brief moment of tranquility, oblivious to the urban bustle unfolding outside. His thoughts drifted between the recent conclusion of a lucrative deal with Chinese investors, a merger that promised to expand the horizons of the Medeiros Group even further. Paulo loosened his Italian silk tie, a gesture that denoted a rare moment of relaxation and relief. The contract's signing represented another triumph in his career, another milestone in the ascending trajectory of the Medeiros Group, solidifying its position as a global business giant. The driver, a discreet and efficient man whose voice was always respectful, interrupted his reverie through the rearview mirror. "Mr. Medeiros, would you like to return to headquarters via the tunnel, avoiding the surface traffic?" However, Paulo felt a growing desire to disconnect from the world of business, to escape the car's artificial atmosphere, to breathe in the city's vibrant air, even amidst its chaos. "No, João," he replied firmly, yet cordially. "I need some fresh air. Drop me off here, I'll walk the rest of the way." Upon exiting the vehicle, Paulo walked with an erect and decisive posture that exuded confidence and power. His imposing presence did not go unnoticed, attracting glances of admiration, respect, and even a hint of envy. The impeccable suit with its precise cut and fine fabric, the designer watch on his wrist, an exclusive model representing a considerable investment, every detail of his appearance communicated success, authority, and a lifestyle that many aspired to. The doorman of the renowned Hotel Fasano, an establishment frequented by São Paulo's elite, a place where million-dollar deals were sealed and achievements celebrated, gave a slight nod of deference as Paulo passed, acknowledging his importance and influence. At 52, Paulo Medeiros had become an even more powerful and influential figure than in his youth, an example of ascension and accomplishment. His dark hair, meticulously combed, displayed subtle silver strands at the temples, lending him an air of distinction, experience, and wisdom accumulated over the years. The lines etched around his blue eyes, piercing and expressive, told stories of difficult decisions, challenges overcome, and a path forged in pursuit of success. On that day, however, the cool breeze of early June, a harbinger of São Paulo's approaching winter, seemed to have no effect on Paulo. His mind was absorbed in a whirlwind of projections, acquisitions, mergers, and strategic plans for the future of the Medeiros Group, always seeking the next goal to be achieved in the relentless corporate world. 10 years of tireless work, unwavering dedication, and personal sacrifices had transformed the Medeiros Group from a successful family business into a global empire, with interests spanning various sectors of the economy, from industry to finance. However, this victorious journey, marked by grueling workdays, sleepless nights dedicated to spreadsheets and reports, and countless personal sacrifices, had left a void in his life, a void carefully disguised beneath the cloak of success, wealth, and power, an emptiness he struggled to ignore by plunging even deeper into his work. Paulo pressed on, driven by ambition, the thirst for recognition and the need to prove his worth to the world. But a part of him yearned for something more, for a meaning that transcended numbers and material achievements, for a human connection he had neglected in his climb to the top. The pedestrian signal finally turned green, interrupting the constant flow of vehicles and allowing the crowd to cross the street. Paulo advanced with the mass of people, checking the designer watch on his wrist, an automatic movement that demonstrated his constant concern with time. The board meeting was scheduled for 40 minutes, and punctuality was a virtue he prized above all else, a reflection of his discipline and respect for commitments. However, his plans were abruptly interrupted by an unexpected scene, a detour in his route that would change the course of his life forever. 4 identical little girls gathered on a street corner, engaged in an activity that contrasted sharply with the sophistication of Avenida Paulista, captured his attention. They were absorbed in their task, arranging delicate handcrafted bouquets of flowers in plastic buckets, creating colorful arrangements with a skill surprising for their age. The children wore mismatched winter coats, showing evident signs of wear and tear, revealing the precariousness of their living conditions. Fingerless gloves, barely protecting their small hands from the morning chill, exposed skin reddened by the cold wind. A makeshift cardboard sign propped against one of the buckets advertised their wares with hand-drawn letters in simple and direct Portuguese: Flores por Esperanza, flowers for hope. Paulo, in his hurried and self-absorbed routine, would likely have walked past them, ignoring them as he did so many other street vendors, immersed in his own thoughts and concerns. However, on that day, something stopped him, an invisible force compelling him to slow his pace and pay attention to those children. There was something about those children that intrigued him, something that awakened a dormant curiosity in his soul, a spark of recognition he couldn't quite place. It was the delicacy of their facial features, the perfect symmetry of their faces, the proud tilt of their chins, a posture that contrasted with the poverty evident in their clothing and the precariousness of their activity. It was as if, despite the adverse circumstances, they carried an innate dignity, a silent strength that resonated within his soul, challenging his perceptions of the world. Then, as if sensing his gaze, as if a telepathic connection had been established between them, one of the girls raised her eyes and stared directly at him, capturing his attention in an invisible bond. In that instant, time seemed to suspend itself, as if the universe conspired to make that encounter happen. The city's hustle and bustle, the strident horns of cars, the frenetic comings and goings of pedestrians, everything fell silent, as if the world around him had become an indistinct blur. Paulo felt the air escape his lungs, as if under a spell, and the world around him faded away, leaving only the eye contact with that child. Those eyes, they were her eyes, Vitoria's. Eyes, his ex-wife's eyes, the woman he had loved and then banished from his life, the eyes he knew so well, that had looked at him with love, passion, and sorrow. However, now, those eyes stared at him from a child's face, a girl who appeared to be only 9 or 10 years old, with innocence and vulnerability etched into every feature. And it wasn't just one face, but 4 identical faces, revealing the existence of quadruplets, a piece of information that struck him like a jolt of reality. The girl who had captured his attention with her intense gaze nudged her sister beside her, whispering something in her ear with a gesture of complicity. Within seconds, all 4 girls were turned towards Paulo, observing him with identical expressions of curiosity, as if trying to decipher the mystery he represented. Their eyes, his eyes, a piercing and striking blue, a hereditary trait that had adorned the Medeiros family's faces for generations, a familiar trait he couldn't deny. The shrill ring of Paulo's cell phone jolted him out of his trance, bringing him back to the reality of the hot asphalt and the bustling crowd. He fumbled as he tried to answer the call, dropping the leather briefcase he carried under his arm, scattering important papers across the sidewalk. His assistant Diana's voice sounded small and distant through the device, struggling to be heard over the street noise. "Mr. Medeiros, the board is asking if you will be late for the meeting. They are awaiting your presence." Paulo struggled to find the words, his voice choked with the emotion and confusion that overwhelmed him. I'll call you back shortly," he managed to say, abruptly ending the call without taking his eyes off the girls, as if fearing they might disappear if he lost sight of them. One of them, the same one who had first noticed him and initiated that strange eye contact, took a step forward, extending a small bouquet of colorful flowers in his direction, as if offering a gift. "Would you like to buy some flowers? They're only 10 reais." Her voice, with its sweet and childlike melody, broke something inside Paulo, awakening an emotion he couldn't quite identify. It was the same musical cadence as Vitoria's voice, but in a higher, innocent, pure tone, as if singing a soft song. The simplicity of the offer, the honesty in the girl's gaze, contrasted sharply with Paulo's complex world of intricate negotiations, calculated strategies, and superficial relationships. "Who are you?" he whispered, the question escaping his lips before he could stop himself, as if an irresistible force compelled him to seek answers. The girl seemed confused by the question, slightly retracting the flowers, as if fearing she had made a mistake or offended the stranger. "I'm Emma. These are my sisters, Lillian, Sophia, and Laura. We're the flower girls." She smiled shyly, revealing a gap where a front tooth was missing, a charming and childlike detail that warmed Paulo's heart, awakening a tenderness he hadn't felt in years. "Everyone calls us that." Paulo repeated the name, Emma, in a low tone as if testing the word's sound on his tongue, trying to decipher the mystery it represented. It was an unfamiliar name to him, yet in some inexplicable way, it seemed to carry a profound meaning, as if connected to a forgotten part of his soul. A car horn blared loudly nearby, breaking the strange spell that hung in the air, snapping Paulo out of his reverie. The smallest of the four girls, Laura, urgently tugged on Emma's sleeve, her eyes filled with concern as if sensing some impending danger. "We have to go," Emma said, her voice tinged with urgency, as if following a rehearsed protocol. "Donna Ruta will be worried if we're late." Before Paulo could formulate a coherent response, before he could even process the avalanche of emotions that washed over him, the girls began to gather their buckets and flowers with trained efficiency, as if performing a choreographed routine. Quick and precise movements without hesitation, without wasting a second. In less than a minute, they disappeared into the crowded sidewalk, blending into the anonymity of the big city, vanishing amidst the sea of pedestrians, leaving Paulo standing alone, his briefcase forgotten at his feet and his heart in turmoil. 10 years. 10 long years had passed since he banished Vittoria from his life, without hesitation, without questioning, based on a medical diagnosis that now seemed so flawed, so imprecise, so laden with devastating consequences. 10 years since she, amidst tears and desperate pleas, insisted that her pregnancy was a miracle, an exception to the rule, but an undeniable reality he refused to accept. 10 years since he refused to believe her words, her honesty, her love, because the doctors had told him that it was impossible for him, Paulo Medeiros, diagnosed as sterile since college, to father a child, much less 4 identical daughters with Vittoria's face. And the blue eyes of the Medeiros family, a familiar trait he couldn't deny, an irrefutable proof of his paternity. Paulo picked up his briefcase with trembling hands, feeling the world spin on its axis, as if the certainties he had built over the years, the truths he considered unshakable, were crumbling before his eyes. The board meeting, the merger with the Chinese investors, the empire he had erected with so much effort and dedication, suddenly lost their importance, as if they were mere sandcastles before the tide of emotions that engulfed him. None of that mattered compared to that unexpected revelation, that possibility he had never considered, that encounter that defied all his beliefs. He had to know the truth. He had to find them again, look into those children's eyes and unravel the mystery that haunted him, even if it meant confronting the mistakes of the past and shattering the present. The pendulum clock in Paulo's penthouse struck midnight, its deep and solemn resonance echoing through the vast empty space, a reminder of the relentless time that had slipped away. He stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows, the dazzling view of São Paulo stretching before him, a sea of lights and movement that seemed to mock his solitude. An untouched glass of expensive whiskey rested in his hand, while his mind endlessly replayed that moment on the corner of Avenida Paulista, as if trying to rewind a damaged tape. 4 identical faces, 4 pairs of the Medeiros, family's blue eyes. The image of the girls haunted him like a ghost, awakening a confusing mix of emotions he couldn't decipher. Guilt, remorse, curiosity, hope. Impossible, he whispered to his reflection in the glass, trying to dismiss the idea that those children could be his daughters, that Vittoria had been telling the truth all these years. Yet he couldn't deny the striking resemblance, the familiarity that disturbed him, the inexplicable connection he felt with those children. Paulo set the glass of whiskey down on the coffee table, the amber liquid swaying gently inside, and walked to his home office, an elegant and functional space where he made the decisions that shaped the destiny of his business empire. From the bottom drawer of his desk, he retrieved a dark leather box, an object he hadn't opened in years, a reliquary of memories he refused to face. Inside the box lay faded photographs, yellowed cards, small mementos of his 5-year marriage to Vittoria, a chapter of his life he had tried to erase from his memory. Their wedding photo stared back at him with intensity, as if challenging his selective amnesia. Vittoria radiant in a white dress, her brown hair cascading in waves over her shoulders, and her green eyes sparkling with joy, hope, and love. Beside her, a younger Paolo smiled with genuine happiness, a feeling his face had forgotten how to express, an emotion he had buried beneath layers of ambition and coldness. He remembered their last night together, with painful clarity, as if time had frozen that moment in his memory, as if he could relive every word, every gesture, every look. Vittoria standing in that very room, her hands protectively cradling her still flat stomach, as if cherishing a precious secret, a miracle that defied all odds. Tears streamed down her face, but her eyes shone with stubborn hope, unwavering faith. "It's a miracle, Paolo," she had insisted, her voice choked with emotion, with the certainty of someone carrying an undeniable truth. "The doctors were wrong, there are babies." His response had been cold, calculated, rational, as if analyzing a financial statement, not dealing with his family's future, with the fate of his wife and children. "All the specialists confirmed it. I can't have children." "Then whose miracle are you carrying, Vittoria?" The pain in her eyes had been unbearable, a suffering he refused to acknowledge, a plea he refused to hear. His pride, his arrogance, his need for control had blinded him to the truth before him, the possibility that he might be wrong. The Medeiros name meant everything to him. Generations of power, prestige, old money, tradition. The idea of another man's children bearing that name was unacceptable, an affront to his legacy, a stain on his family history. His phone rang during their argument, interrupting the tense moment, as if fate were conspiring to separate them. It was Helena, his sister, his partner in the Medeiros group, calling with an urgent, "Business matter?" Another problem to be solved, another important decision to be made. Paolo remembered how Vittoria's expression hardened at the interruption, as if she expected that moment, as if she knew that Helena's presence would always intrude on their lives, casting a shadow over their relationship. "Your sister always comes between us, Vittoria," he had said, his voice accusatory, as if blaming someone else for his own mistakes. "She never wanted this marriage to work. Don't blame Helena for your affair," he retorted, his voice filled with anger, suspicion, and a hint of jealousy. The next morning, Vittoria was gone, leaving her gold wedding band on the bedside table, a perfect circle broken by distrust, pride, and Paolo's inability to accept the truth. There was no note, no explanation, only a deafening silence echoing through the empty apartment, a void he refused to fill. Paolo's fingers traced the gold band still inside the box, an object that represented a past he refused to face, a symbol of a love he had destroyed with his own hands. He had convinced himself that he was right, that Vittoria had betrayed him, that there was no other plausible explanation for her pregnancy. Helena had reinforced his belief, subtly at first, with insinuating comments, disapproving glances, and half-truths, then more explicitly, as the weeks passed, fueling his anger, his resentment, and his thirst for revenge. "She was only after the Medeiros fortune," Helena insisted, her voice laced with venom and a hint of satisfaction. "I warned you from the beginning. She wasn't one of us." Paolo sighed and returned the photos to the box, a mix of guilt and doubt consuming him from within. Had he been manipulated by Helena? Had Vittoria been telling the truth all these years? Quadruplets seemed statistically improbable as an excuse for infidelity, but the girl's resemblance to him was undeniable. He picked up the phone and called his head of security, Silva, a trusted man who had worked for the Medeiros family for years, a discreet and efficient professional who never questioned his orders. "Silva, I need you to find someone for me," he said, his voice tinged with urgency. 4 girls, approximately 9 years old, identical quadruplets. They sell flowers on Avenida Paulista. He hesitated for a moment, as if about to cross an irreversible line, to open a door to a past he refused to face, and locate Victoria Barros, my ex-wife. After hanging up, Paulo stared at the night view of São Paulo, the city lights reflecting the confusion and turmoil in his eyes. The empire he had built in Vitoria's absence, the success he had so desperately sought, the power he so highly valued, suddenly seemed hollow, devoid of meaning, as if he had built his life upon a lie. The next morning, he would return to that street corner and wait. He needed answers, even if those answers destroyed everything he believed about the last 10 years of his life, even if it meant confronting the truth about himself. The truth, he realized, was more important than any material gain, more valuable than any fortune. Paulo arrived at the corner of Paulista and Augusta at 7 the next morning, haunted by the memory of the previous day's encounter. The image of the girls etched into his mind like a scar. He had traded his usual tailored suit, the uniform of success, for faded jeans, a simple sweater, and a baseball cap, a disguise that seemed strange on his imposing figure, but allowed him to blend into the crowd unnoticed. The street corner remained deserted, empty and silent, devoid of the colorful buckets of flowers, devoid of the girls with the unsettling blue eyes that had so deeply disturbed him. He waited patiently for 3 long hours, ignoring the insistent calls from the office, the urgent messages from his partners, the unavoidable appointments that awaited him. By noon, disappointment had settled into his bones, like a cold that consumed him from within. Perhaps the previous day's encounter had been an anomaly, a strange coincidence he had overestimated. The girls might sell flowers elsewhere, on another corner, or only on weekends when there was more foot traffic. The idea of leaving, of abandoning his search for answers, began to take shape in his mind, seducing him with the promise of relief. Just as he was about to succumb to temptation, to turn his back on the past, a flash of movement across the street caught his attention, reigniting his hope. Weaving their way through the crowd of pedestrians, like small boats navigating a sea of legs, were 4 small figures in mismatched coats, their colorful hats contrasting with the gray urban landscape, like points of light amidst the darkness. Relief washed over him like a warm wave, dispelling the cold of disappointment, followed immediately by a surge of anxiety, a fear that the girls might disappear again, leaving him with more questions than answers. The girls set up their makeshift stand, with trained efficiency, as if following a familiar ritual, arranging modest bouquets of carnations and daisies, the simple flowers that represented their source of livelihood. Paulo observed everything from behind a folded newspaper, trying not to attract attention, noticing how the one called Ima directed her sisters with a gentle yet firm authority, as if she were the natural leader of the group. A hurried businessman, with a cell phone glued to his ear and a leather briefcase in his hand, rushed by on the sidewalk, accidentally knocking over one of the buckets of flowers. The dirty street water spilled across the pavement, soaking the bouquets and splashing the shoes of some pedestrians. The man didn't even stop to apologize, to offer help, to show a hint of empathy, continuing on his way without regard for the damage caused, as if the flowers and the children were invisible. Paulo's instinct was to intervene, to protect the girls, to reprimand the man for his lack of consideration, but something held him back. He watched in silence as the youngest, Laura, fought back tears, her face contorted in an expression of sadness, while Sophia wrapped a protective arm around her shoulders, offering comfort and security. Lillian and Ima quickly salvaged the flowers that could still be sold, demonstrating an impressive resilience for their age. There were no tantrums, no complaints, no whining, only a silent determination as they regrouped, ready to face another day of work. That determination, Paulo realized with a mix of admiration and melancholy, was Vitoria's determination, the strength he had always admired in her, the ability to overcome adversity without losing hope. When the pedestrian traffic slowed down around 2 p.m., the girls began packing up the remaining flowers, preparing to end their day's sales. This was Paulo's chance to approach them, to start a conversation, to finally seek the answers that had been tormenting him. Paolo followed the girls at a safe distance, keeping close enough not to lose sight of their colorful hats, but without getting too close to frighten them or arouse their suspicion. They led him away from the glittering towers of Avenida Paulista, the imposing buildings, and the designer stores through neighborhoods that became progressively more modest, revealing a side of the city that Paolo rarely saw, a world of contrasts and inequalities. In Bixiga, a traditional neighborhood with narrow streets and old houses, they stopped at a small bakery, a simple and welcoming place where they bought warm bread and strong coffee. Through the steamy window, Paolo watched Emma carefully counting crumpled bills before buying a single misto quente, ham and cheese sandwich, which they divided into 4 equal parts, sharing each bite with a smile. The scene twisted something inside Paolo, awakening a feeling of guilt and compassion he had never experienced before. His daughters, if they were his daughters, sharing a simple sandwich while he dined in expensive restaurants, frequenting luxurious establishments, surrounded by comfort and ostentation. The hypocrisy of his life, the disparity between his wealth and those children's poverty, hit him like a slap in the face. The journey continued for a few more streets, increasingly distant from the city center, until they reached a rundown area in Liberdade, a neighborhood with a strong Asian influence, but also home to impoverished communities. Their final destination was a dilapidated building with a peeling facade and faded paint, bearing a worn sign that read, La Esperanza, Abrigo para Mujeres y Crianças, Hope Home, shelter for women and children. Paolo froze across the street, watching the girls disappear inside, swallowed by the apparent squalor of the place. The shelter appeared clean and organized, but desperately lacking in resources. Paint peeling off the walls, revealing layers of previous colors. Cracked windows patched with tape, trying to insulate from the cold and the street noise. Rusty security bars, indicating the lack of investment and the daily struggle for survival. Vittoria, the woman he had loved and then abandoned, living in a homeless shelter. The thought was inconceivable to Paolo, a reality that challenged his understanding of the world. She came from a respectable family, not wealthy like the Medeiros, but comfortable, with a history of dignity, values, and traditions. How had she fallen so low? How could life be so cruel? A gray-haired woman, with a face etched with wrinkles and tired eyes yet still filled with kindness, appeared at the shelter's door, greeting the girls with warm hugs, demonstrating genuine affection and maternal care. They handed her something they carried with them, an envelope with the money earned from selling flowers, the fruit of those children's hard work. The woman's face crinkled into a smile of pride and gratitude before they all disappeared inside, leaving Paolo outside, his heart heavy and his mind troubled. He felt like an intruder, a voyeur observing a reality he had never imagined, a world of hardship and suffering that existed just a few miles from his luxurious penthouse. Paolo's cell phone vibrated in his pocket, interrupting his thoughts and bringing him back to reality. It was Silva, his head of security, with the information he had been anxiously awaiting, the result of the search for Vittoria and the girls. "Sir, I have preliminary information about, Vittoria Barros," he said, his voice tinged with the expectation of delivering important news. "Go ahead," Paolo replied, his voice slightly hoarse, his eyes still fixed on the shelter's door. "Sir, she is imprisoned in the state penitentiary. A 6-month sentence for petty theft. She began serving it 4 months ago." The world spun beneath Paolo's feet. Vittoria in prison. The Vittoria he knew wouldn't steal anything, not even a paperclip. Something was wrong with that information, something that didn't fit with his memory of her. "The children are under the temporary custody of a Ruth Abernathy, a former social worker. They reside at La Esperanza." "I know." Paolo finished the sentence, his voice choked with emotion, his eyes still fixed on the building where his daughters lived. A decision formed in his mind, clear and unwavering. He would not stand idly by. He would not let Vittoria and those children suffer any longer. He would delve into the truth, no matter how painful and he would do everything in his power to rectify the injustices of the past. Paulo crossed the street with determined strides, resolved to correct the errors of his past. He had abandoned those children once, driven by ignorance and pride. He would not abandon them again. He would enter that shelter, face whatever challenges awaited him, and do whatever was necessary to bring them back into his life, to give them the love and support they deserved, to become the father they had been. Denied. "We always need volunteers," Donna Rudy said, her eyes studying Paulo with a mixture of caution and curiosity in her cramped office within the shelter. He felt conspicuously out of place, an outsider in a world he barely knew. Despite his attempts at casual attire, he still exuded an aura of wealth and power, something that seemed to create a subtle distance between him and the shelter's residents. "Especially men," Donna Ruth continued, her voice firm yet gentle. "Most of our children have never had positive male figures in their lives. They've only known abandonment and disappointment." Paulo nodded, maintaining his carefully constructed facade, the lie he had woven to gain access to the girls' lives and uncover the truth. "I recently sold my technology startup. I want to give back to the community while I decide on my next move." "Well, Senior Paulo," she paused, emphasizing the pseudonym he had chosen, as if testing its validity. "La Esperanza isn't a glamorous place. We need help with meals, maintenance, tutoring. Are you still interested?" "Absolutely." His gaze drifted towards a wall covered with children's drawings, vibrant expressions of dreams and realities. Among them, 4 identical depictions of flower bouquets stood out, each signed with a different name: Emma, Lillian, Sophia, Laura. Root followed his gaze, her expression softening with a touch of tenderness. "The quadruplets, our special girls." There was a hint of pride in her voice, a sense of protectiveness that Paulo couldn't help but notice. He sensed that these children held a unique place in Root's heart, and he wondered what role Vittoria had played in shaping their lives. "Their mother was one of our success stories. Until recently." "What happened?" Paulo asked, trying to sound casually curious rather than desperately eager for information. Root sighed, a mixture of sadness and frustration clouding her eyes. Vittoria was working 3 jobs to support them. She was a force of nature, driven by an unwavering love for her daughters. When the pandemic hit, she lost everything. Her jobs, her apartment, her savings. They were evicted, left with nowhere to go. Root shook her head in disbelief at the cruelty of their circumstances. Vittoria was a florist before the girls were born. She taught them how to arrange bouquets, and they started selling them on street corners to make ends meet. Paulo's throat tightened, and a wave of guilt washed over him, threatening to drown him in remorse. "And now she's serving time for stealing food from a supermarket." Root's voice hardened, indignation lacing her words. "The judge made an example of her. 6 months for taking bread and butter. The girls are here while I petitioned for temporary guardianship." The casual cruelty of it all stunned Paulo. Vittoria, a woman who had fought so hard to provide for her daughters, imprisoned for an act of desperation, while he lived in a world of obscene luxury, untouched by the hardships that plagued so many others. "The girls are remarkable," Root continued, interrupting his spiraling thoughts. "They pool their flower money for essentials. Emma manages their finances with an uncanny maturity. She's 9 but seems 40. Lillian creates the arrangements, displaying an artistic talent that's truly extraordinary. Sophia protects them on the streets, her eyes always scanning for danger. And Laura," her voice faltered slightly, revealing a deep well of affection for the youngest. "Laura keeps their hope alive. She reminds them that their mother will come back soon, that they'll be a family again. They sell flowers alone. Isn't it dangerous?" Paulo's concern was genuine, a reflection of the growing protectiveness he felt towards those children. "They don't have a choice," Root said, her gaze challenging. "I can't leave the shelter, and they need the income to survive. It's a harsh reality, but they're incredibly resourceful. Perhaps you could accompany them sometimes if you're serious about volunteering," Root suggested, her tone carefully measured. "It would certainly ease my mind." Paulo nodded, trying to process the weight of everything he was learning. "Does their father help in any way?" Root's expression darkened. a hint of bitterness creeping into her voice. Vittoria never speaks of him, except to say that he denied they were his. Some wealthy man who couldn't accept that his medical diagnosis was wrong. A stubborn, arrogant fool. She studied Paolo's face with a piercing intensity, as if trying to decipher his true motives. The girls have his eyes, though. That distinct blue that's a Medeiros family trait. It's undeniable. Paolo felt exposed, transparent, as if Ruth could see the truth hidden beneath his carefully constructed lies. He quickly changed the subject, seeking to redirect the conversation away from his personal connection to the girls. When can I start my volunteer work? The dinner shift begins in 20 minutes. The girls help serve the meals to the residents. Ruth stood up, signaling the end of their conversation, but not before delivering one final cautionary warning. They're wary of new adults, Senior Paolo. They've been disappointed and hurt too many times to trust easily. You'll need to earn their trust if that's truly your intention. As Paolo walked through the shelter's common area, he absorbed the stark reality of where his daughters lived. The place was clean and organized, but desperately overcrowded and under-resourced. 30 women and children crammed into communal rooms, sharing only a handful of bathrooms, with little to no privacy. The air was thick with the scent of poverty and desperation, yet it also carried an undercurrent of resilience and solidarity. In the kitchen, Paolo froze at the entrance, paralyzed by the scene unfolding before him. The quadruplets stood in a neat line, wearing oversized and improvised aprons that reached their knees, carefully, ladling soup into bowls with a precision and efficiency that seemed incongruous with their age. They moved with a quiet grace, their small hands steady and their faces focused on the task at hand. Emma noticed him first, her eyes so strikingly similar to his own, narrowed with suspicion, as if assessing his presence, trying to discern his intentions. "Girls," Ruth called out, breaking the silence that had settled over the room. "This is Senior Paolo. He'll be volunteering with us for a while. He's here to help." 4 identical faces turned towards him, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and wariness. Paolo was struck by the weariness etched on their young faces, a premature knowledge of the harsh realities of life. These weren't carefree children, like the ones he encountered in his privileged world. They were survivors, hardened by necessity, yet still carrying a flicker of hope within their hearts. Paolo managed a weak smile, fighting back the overwhelming surge of emotion that threatened to consume him. "Hello," he said simply, his voice thick with tenderness and a hint of shame. "I'm looking forward to helping out." "Do you know anything about flowers?" Lillian asked, her curiosity piqued by his presence. Surprisingly, Paolo shook his head. "Actually, no, but I'd like to learn. I've always admired their beauty." Sophia, the self-appointed protector of her sisters, stepped slightly in front of the others, her gaze challenging. "Then you can carry the heavy buckets. Tomorrow, Senior Paolo. That would be a big help." "You're holding them wrong." Lillian sighed, stepping closer to Paolo to demonstrate the correct way to handle the delicate stems. "The flowers need to breathe. You're crushing them." Her small hands gently adjusted his grip, revealing a knowledge and skill that impressed Paolo. He realized how much he had taken for granted in his life, how little he knew about the simple things. 3 weeks into his volunteer work at the shelter, Paolo found himself seated cross-legged on the floor of the common room, surrounded by a vibrant array of flowers, and the 4 increasingly familiar little girls. What had begun as a mission to confirm their identities, to satisfy his own curiosity, had evolved into something far more profound, into an emotional entanglement he hadn't anticipated. "Sorry," he offered, genuinely contrite, as he clumsily attempted to arrange a bouquet. "I never realized there were so many rules to flower arranging." "Everything has rules," Emma replied, her tone practical and experienced beyond her years. "You just have to learn them if you want to do it right." She counted the day's earnings, her small fingers separating crumpled bills and coins with trained precision. No 9-year-old should be this familiar with financial responsibility, Paolo thought, observing the scene with a mix of admiration and sadness. Emma, with her nimble little hands, sorted the crumpled 1 and 5 real notes with an accuracy that seemed to come from years of practice. Her eyes, normally bright with childlike vivacity, held a precocious seriousness. as if they had witnessed more of life's hardships than any child should. 35 Rias are missing, she murmured, her brow furrowed in concentration. We need at least 200 for Mom's canteen account. The casual mention of Vittoria's imprisonment still resonated within Paolo, a constant reminder of his past failures and a driving force behind his desire for redemption. He had learned that the girls visited their mother weekly, accompanied by Donna Rute, on an arduous journey to the state penitentiary. The thought of Vittoria, a woman he had once known as vibrant and full of life, now confined within the cold walls of a prison cell, was a heavy burden he carried with growing anguish. Maybe sales will be better today, he suggested, trying to inject a note of optimism into the conversation. It's Saturday. More people will be out and about. Laura, the quietest of the four, who rarely spoke unless directly addressed, touched his sleeve with a hesitant gesture. Her large blue eyes, so strikingly similar to Paolo's, gazed at him with a timid hope that pierced his heart. Are you really coming with us today, Signor Paolo? The whole day? There was a vulnerability in her voice, a yearning for stability and connection that Paolo felt like a physical ache in his chest. The whole day? He repeated, his smile gentle and reassuring. I'll carry whatever you need, wherever you need to go. I'm here for you girls. Ruth watched their interaction from the kitchen doorway, her expression a mixture of caution and curiosity. Her initial suspicion had gradually softened, but a flicker of doubt still lingered in her eyes. As the girls packed up their materials, preparing for another day of work on the bustling streets of São Paulo, Paolo approached Ruth, seeking to understand the complex dynamic between those four identical faces that housed such distinct personalities. How are they so different from each other? He asked, his tone genuinely curious. I thought identical quadruplets would be more identical in every way. Ruth smiled, a touch of wisdom in her gaze. Physically, yes, they are remarkably alike, practically mirror images of each other. But their personalities have been shaping themselves uniquely since the moment they were born. It's a fascinating phenomenon to observe. She paused, as if reliving cherished memories. Vittoria always said it was as if nature had given her four different versions of herself, each with their own strengths and weaknesses, their own talents and inclinations. Ruth explained that Vittoria had chosen the girls' names with a deliberate and loving intention, seeking to reflect the qualities she wished to cultivate in each of them, the potential she saw within their tiny souls. She named them Ima for strength, the natural leader, always ready to take charge of any situation. Her will as unyielding as the earth itself. Sophia for wisdom, the quiet observer, who analyzes the world around her with a surprising depth of understanding, her insights often startlingly profound. Lillian for beauty, not just the outward kind, but also the beauty of kindness, compassion, and artistic expression. Her creations a reflection of the grace within her. And Laura for life, the most sensitive and hopeful of the four, the one who keeps the flame of faith burning, even in the darkest of times, her spirit as resilient as the enduring force of life itself. Paolo absorbed each word, each detail about the daughters he never knew, feeling a mixture of admiration and remorse. Vittoria had given her children meaningful names, invested in their individualities, nurtured their potential, while he remained oblivious to their existence, consumed by his own self-centered world of ambition and relentless pursuit of success. The weight of his past actions pressed down on him, a heavy burden that he desperately wanted to alleviate. Vittoria worked tirelessly to provide for them, Ruth continued, her voice filled with a mixture of awe and sadness. She juggled multiple jobs, often working around the clock, sacrificing her own needs and desires to ensure her daughters had every opportunity. She wanted to give them a life free from the hardships she had known, to empower them to chase their dreams without the limitations that poverty imposes. Ruth shook her head, a mixture of disbelief and indignation in her eyes. And then the pandemic hit, and everything crumbled. She lost her jobs, their apartment, their meager savings, all at once. It was devastating. Paolo's voice joined hers, completing the sentence with a bitterness that reflected his own profound self-reproach. And without my support, without any help from the man who should have been their father, Root studied him with a penetrating gaze, as if trying to gauge the sincerity of his words, to discern the depth of his remorse. You seem deeply invested in their story, Senor Paulo. It's not every day that someone like you shows such concern for these children. Paulo looked away, feeling uncomfortable under the intensity of her scrutiny. He was acutely aware of the disparity between his privileged life and the harsh reality of the shelter, the stark contrast between his wealth and the children's poverty. Children in need concern everyone, he replied, his tone deliberately casual, trying to downplay the emotional turmoil that consumed him. But Root wasn't easily fooled. She sensed the genuine empathy behind his words, the pain that lingered in his eyes, the unspoken connection that bound him to those girls. Later, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the bustling streets, Paulo accompanied the girls to their usual street corner where they sold flowers. He kept a respectful distance, observing them interact with customers, protecting them from unwanted attention, becoming an invisible guardian. Business was brisk as it usually was on a Saturday evening. The novelty of their identical faces, the delicate beauty of the flowers, and the innocent charm with which they approached passers-by made them difficult to resist. Paulo watched with a mixture of pride and melancholy as Emma negotiated prices with customers, displaying a commercial acumen that was both surprising and impressive for a child her age. Sophia scanned the crowd for potential trouble, her eyes sharp and alert, always ready to defend her sisters. Lillian created personalized floral arrangements on the spot, showcasing a natural artistic talent that drew admiration from onlookers. And Laura charmed everyone with her shy smile and sweet demeanor, melting even the coldest of hearts. During a brief lull in the sales, Sophia approached Paulo, her gaze as suspicious and direct as ever. "Why do you keep looking at us like that, Senor Paulo?" she asked, her small hands planted firmly on her hips, in a miniature imitation of adult authority. "It looks like you're trying to memorize our faces, like we're some kind of puzzle you're trying to solve." Paulo startled, caught off guard by the girl's perceptiveness. He hadn't realized how transparent his intentions might be, how his eyes might be betraying the secrets he was desperately trying to conceal. "What do you mean, like that?" he replied, his tone carefully casual, his heart pounding in his chest. "I'm just admiring the beauty of the flowers and your skill in arranging them so beautifully. You're all very talented." But Sophia wasn't convinced. She continued to stare at him with her piercing blue eyes, her gaze unwavering, as if trying to pierce through his carefully constructed defenses and see the truth within. Before Paulo could formulate a more convincing response, a distracted woman stumbled and dropped her bouquet, scattering the colorful blooms across the sidewalk. Paulo instinctively knelt to help her gather the fallen flowers, seeking to divert attention from the uncomfortable conversation and offer a helping hand. However, when he straightened up, he realized that Sophia was still watching him with that same intense gaze, her expression unreadable, as if the incident with the flowers had somehow deepened her suspicion. "Your eyes," she said slowly, her voice filled with a strange sense of recognition. "They're the same as ours."